Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, a festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the loaves, left over by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. And when the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, he withdrew again up the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea toward Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. And the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately they reached the land toward which they were going. The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. A couple weeks ago, I made a hospital visit to one of our members, Jay Benar, and I knocked on his door, and he was just waking up from a nap. So I went up to him, and I said, "Jay Benar, how are you? It's good to see you." And he rolls over, and he says, "Intern Drew, I see you've gained some weight." And I looked down, and my shirt was bloused out, but I decided to have fun with him, and I said, "Of course I've gained some weight. Y'all haven't stopped feeding me all year." Y'all haven't stopped feeding me all year. You know, it didn't take me long when I got here to realize so much of what this congregation does revolves around food. I think back to those very first intern dinners, those Friday nights, and the first one I was fed King Ranch chicken for the first time at the home of Terry and Jackie Corbell. And I was fed at those Calvary cafes on Wednesday night in the fellowship hall, having dinner with you, and sometimes even in the kitchen chopping brisket and peeling potatoes. And I remember being fed down in the Family Life Center with some members of this church and some homeless men in our community, as together we shared stories and we shared food and we shared that experience. Y'all haven't stopped feeding me all year. Which is why I'm pretty sure is why you bought me a gym membership before I even got to Calvary. But it's no wonder if I've gained a little weight since I've been here. But I'll tell you, I've gained a lot more than just a little weight. Which is what I think this story from Jesus is about. This hungry, this starving multitude comes to Jesus, and for nothing, just a couple of barley loaves and fish, he is able to feed them. He satisfies their needs, and from empty, they are full. And not just full of bread and fish. I really think the true miracle of this story is that in this meal, they are fed with hope. And they're fed with faith. And they're fed with community. They're fed with life. And this year, you all have fed me in so many ways that have nothing to do with the food. Back last August when Sarah and I came down here we drove down from Minnesota just weeks after we were married, just days after returning from an international trip. We got into a car, we drove to Texas, a place where neither of us had ever set foot. And you fed us with hospitality, you fed us with welcome, you fed us with this Texas-sized greeting. And throughout this year, you've fed me with support, whether it's coming out to Wednesday night Bible studies in the library or Sunday morning forums. Even when I've tried to do something a little different, like have Thanksgiving Eve service in the fellowship hall, you supported me. And this whole year, you've been supporting me and Sarah, even as we've been away from family. And even when both of us lost grandparents this year, you fed us with love. And you fed us with care. You fed us with your prayers. You fed me with opportunities this year. Now, I've lost track of the official count of how many sermons I've preached, but Pastor Phil thinks it's over 80 sermons. You guys have heard me say a lot of stuff this year. You fed me with those opportunities, and when I wasn't preaching, you fed me with opportunities to sing and to lead worship and to pray with you and to visit you. You fed me with the opportunity to work with some of the best kids I could ever imagine at Club 456 and confirmation and having so much fun with them. And even some in these last couple weeks, you fed me with the chance to learn 42 and 84 playing dominoes with the senior adult group. And you fed me with relationships. From an intern committee who has walked alongside me every step of the way, to a staff that has been so welcoming and so friendly and who have become incredible role models and mentors and examples for what a church staff should look like. To relationships with each of you, meals and homes, quick conversations in the hallway after worship, or even just that moment of sharing the peace. I've even been fed by those relationships of the ones who are no longer with us, who we lost this year, who now see God face to face. People like Susan and Lanham and Lori, fed by their faith, fed by their life, fed by their witness. And I am here right now, and I am full. I am full. But I have to share something with you, and it's not easy for me to share. This intern year did not meet my expectations. What I expected was to come into this internship year and teach and preach and care and visit and pray. I had this joke with my intern committee that this year was a year about me learning to be a super pastor. Learning how to feed 5,000 people with just loaves and fishes. Maybe even learning how to walk on the water. That was going to be what this year was about, and it did not meet my expectations. You see, instead of learning how to feed a multitude, I instead learned a lot more about my own hunger, my own need for the grace of God. Instead of learning how to walk on water to calm people's fears, I learned a lot about my own fears and about my own limitations. And I learned about my thirst for a God who can do miraculous things. Which is why when I think about this year, think about the story we wrote together, this journey that we were on together, as delicious as all the food was that you fed me with, I realized that this year was never about the food. The story of Jesus feeding 5,000 is not a story about loaves and fishes. This story, this journey, this year that we were with together is about the one who is feeding us. And that's why the most important meal I have been fed this year has come right here at this table. Because we all come to this rail starving. A starving, hungry multitude, empty, looking to be fed with something real, with the bread of life, and it's here. That we are fed with Jesus' own body and blood broken for us. That fills us when we are hungry, and that is a miracle. And in this miracle, we become bread for a hungry world. And it is a hungry world. I mean, just think about all we've seen together in this year. Racial tension erupting all over the country. Terrorist threats internationally. We've seen Ebola decimate West Africa. We've seen gun violence take the lives of people all over. This is a hungry world. This is a world in desperate need of the kind of bread that we get here. And I know it's like the disciples. It's easy for us to say, but it would take years of work to satisfy those needs just a little. What are we among so many? Yet when we come to this table, when we come to this meal hungry, we know that it is Jesus who feeds us. We know that out of nothing, out of just loaves and fishes, Jesus can do something miraculous. And so thank you, Calvary. Thank you for all those ways that you've fed me this year. Thank you for the delicious food in all of those ways that you fed me. But most importantly, thanks be to God, who is the one who is constantly feeding us when we are empty. But I want you to know that I'm not leaving here empty. I'm leaving here quite full. Full of food, but also full of hope. Full of encouragement, full of faith, full of life, and as St. Paul says, filled with all the fullness of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.